Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon and today I am back with my August reading wrap up. So all the books that I read in August, and actually it's pretty timely for me. I know we're like a good few days into September, but we're not at the halfway point, and normally they come sort of towards the end of the following month, so I'm chuffed with myself. And before I start talking to you about all the books that I read in August though, I just wanted to mention one that I've already read in September that is the pick for the return of Crime Time with me and my lovely friend Pip, and we will be recording that video next weekend where we'll be talking about Velvet Was the Night by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And if you've got any questions or themes you'd like us to discuss, leave them in the comments down below. Try to avoid spoilers. Maybe I'll put like spoiler questions or spoilery questions on Instagram so that people can't see that in the question box. But yeah, we would love you to join in. If you want to pick it up, you've still got a couple of weeks to read it because we'll be recording it the weekend, but then it'll go live a week or so after that. Definitely before the end of September though, and we'll be announcing our next pick for Crime Time, which is the beginning of a series. I'm very excited about it. Anyway, back to what I said I was probably going to talk about in this video, and that is what I read in August. I'm going to do it in the order that I read them. It was overall a pretty good reading month. In fact, no, that's not fair. It was a really good reading month. There are a couple of blips. I think I'm reflecting the fact that September's been up so far because I feel like I'm not getting through enough books, even though I'm reading quite a lot, and also because I'm reading books for a prize. I mean, I'm now talking about September, I'm not talking about August, but because I'm reading books for a prize at the moment and I can't talk about them, that's a bit of an odd phase. But August was great, and I think that's partly because I went with a few more sort of fun reads, if that's the right term. And I did talk about whatever happened to reading books for fun. I'll link that video down below. And that really helped. It kind of, I think over the summer I got a little bit of bookish burnout, and had just read some, well, for certain projects read quite intensely, which I'm sort of doing at the moment, and I've realised that I need to be much more sort of whimmish with my reading where and when I can. Anyway, let's move on. Oh, one other little bit of admin. There'll be an announcement about my new job at some point this week. There we go. Right, so first book that I read in, oh, and I should say, we're never going to get started, that I will try to do what I want to do going forward with my what I read in every month or reading wrap-up videos. I haven't decided what title I'm going to go with because reading wrap-ups seems to have gone a bit passé as a title. It now seems to be like what I read in August or whatever. Anyway, again, tangent. But I want to try, if I can remember, to put little snapshots of my favourite bits of the month at the end of these videos so that you don't just get a reading wrap up, you get a little bit of a wrap up of my month, because I'm not currently vlogging. Well, I am over on Patreon, but I'm not here. Right, let's get cracking with the books then, shall we? Because 3 minutes in, haven't held a book. Actually, no, that's not true. I have held a book up. Move on, Simon. Come on, get on with it. So the first book that I read in August was 100 Shadows by Hwang Jungeun, and this is translated by Jungeun. And I picked this up because August was Women in Translation Month, and it's the second book published by Tilted Access Press, and I would like to read all of Tilted Access Press's books at some point, and if I could read them in order, that would be fab. This, sadly, didn't really work for me. The premise was that it was about two young people who meet and sort of start seeing each other, and as they do, people's shadows are sort of trying to leave them almost and go off and have a life of their own. And I thought, oh, that sounds really sinister. And the first part of the book, in a forest, where one of the characters' shadow does start to go off, was, but then after that, I felt it really lost its way. It brought up some interesting subjects about the changes in Korea, South Korea, and how there are like the modernization of cultural institutions, but also in modernising they are eradicating, or by modernising and gentrifying, they're eradicating some of the sort of old, real working class roots of society, but also their jobs, their livelihoods, the places they frequent. That I found really interesting, but it sort of just didn't work with this leaving of shadows, which I think could have been much more sinister than it was. So that was a shame, but I still am really keen to read all of Tilted Access Press books at some point. I mean, there's a lot of them now, but yeah, I'd really like to. So yeah, that wasn't a hit for me, but I'm glad that I've got to it and got it off the shelves. What was a massive hit for me was Mary Jean Chan's Bright Fear. This poetry collection is utterly phenomenal. I absolutely loved her debut, which is either called Flesh or Fleshy. And that was just, yeah, I thought that was wonderful. This I thought was as wonderful. This I thought was as wonderful. Yeah, I did think it was as wonderful as the first. This looks at such a variety of things. It looks around gender and the feminine and masculine. It looks around what it's like to have multiple cultures within your personality and being because of where you have lived, where you've chosen to live, where you want to live, where you make your heart your home in a lot of ways, and how that can go against maybe family, or there's some really interesting familial tensions in this book, especially around queerness and culture. And it's also a book that's very much about the pandemic and COVID, but also does feature, and I found these really hard to read, but the way Mary Jean Chan writes about them is kind of brutally beautiful, even though it's awful, if that makes sense. If you read them, or if you've read them, you'll know what I mean. Around the anti-Asian sort of rhetoric because of the pandemic and people blaming Asian people for it, and that I found really hard to read but poignantly written. And yeah, I just thought all the poems were fantastic. There wasn't a dud in here for me. So yeah, I thought this was great, and anything that Mary Jean Chan publishes I will race to read. Then we had, oh, I nearly threw it on the floor, another Women in Translation book, one that I was super duper excited to read and maybe slightly overhyped in my head. I was recommended this by Juno Dawson particularly, and I picked it up in West Kirby Bookshop. It's My Husband by Maud Ventura, translated from the French by Emma Ramadan. And this is about a woman who, I was going to say housewife, but she's not, she's a teacher, but I did feel real housewife vibes off her because she doesn't really ever talk about her work that much. All she really ever talks about is her husband and how much she loves her husband, and she really loves her husband, and sometimes her husband doesn't do things that she particularly loves, and she introduces small initial punishments for these moments, and then they get a little bit bigger, and then there is, I won't say any more, but the ending surprised me and I liked that. However, sometimes I felt this was kind of repetitive in how obsessed she was about her husband, which I get is the point, but it would almost become bogged down by that. There was a sort of twist that I didn't see coming, or a change of tone, maybe I should say, more than a twist. But there was something that happened, or something that was revealed about halfway, a third of the way through, halfway through the book, that I thought was absolutely brilliant and I did not see coming. I hate saying that though, because now if you go and read it, you might go and look for that, so ignore what I said. There's just a change of tone, something happens, and I was like, ooh, I'm really invested now. And then at the end I was like, oh, okay. And I think I was meant to be like, ooh, at the end, but I was like, yeah, all right. And that sort of fell a little bit flatter than I was expecting because of the middle bit, and I think because we did get bogged down. It's definitely about someone's unraveling, and it's definitely about who has control in a relationship, and the fact that we never know what the other person in a relationship is really thinking, which is something that blows my brain. And like, I overthink about that quite a lot in terms of friendships, let alone relationships. So yeah, that was interesting to read, if mildly like, ooh, a bit close to the bone. So yeah, I thought this was great. No, I thought this was very good. I wanted it to be really great, and it wasn't quite for me, but I did enjoy it. I have seen that people have said if you like that, there's either Waiting for Ted to read, or what was the one? Oh no. Jen really, really loved it, and I can't think what it's called now. I can see Mrs. March. There we go. That's meant to be also really good if you like that kind of book. The next book is it the fourth in the series or the third in the series? I can't remember. I think the fourth one's it's the third. The fourth one is coming this week, and I'm going to get it and just read it really early because I always save them for some point. I don't know why, because why do we always save things that are treats? Why not just have them and enjoy them? Anyway, what am I talking about? It is the third in the Thursday Murder Club series by Richard Oseman. This is The Bullet That Missed. I don't want to say too much about this because if you've not read the first two, it doesn't really give anything away, but at the same time, potential spoilers-ish, I guess, maybe. But suffice to say, this is about a group of, a variety of 4 friends who are all living in is it a retirement home, retirement village? I'm not going to say old people's home because it's not really that at all. And they've become friends, and what unites them is their interest in cold cases and how they also, when often investigating a cold case, either bring it to fruition and therefore, not bring it to fruition, what do I mean? Bring it to the forefront and then suddenly it's no longer a cold case because someone who wanted to keep secrets then wants to keep them stum. Or there'll be a crime that's suddenly happening to do with one of their past that then you're also solving both. And this was the latter. I really, really loved it. I love the characters in this book. I'm going to be honest, I don't feel like the formula changes massively in each one. It could be different in the next one, but I don't mind that. I read this on a plane. I hate flying. I try not to do it with Valium anymore because I used to quite a lot and that was quite the experience for anyone with me. But what I try and do now is like have a really good gripping thriller because I think it makes me sort of relax a bit more, but also I want to beat the fear, and this helps, and this certainly did. I devoured this predominantly on a plane and then finished it at the hotel that night. So yeah, read this pretty much in one day. Really excited for the next one, especially because it's purple and purple is my favourite colour. I just think there is a sense of humour to Richard Oseman's writing that is, I'm not going to say it is as good as Joanna Cannon because I think she's the queen of that, along with actually Kate Atkinson. But the way ordinary phrases or people become extraordinary, I just really love that in fiction. And also, I love trying to solve a good mystery, and I don't know if I do with these ones. I think I just get so lost in all the different characters and enjoy all of that I can't quite work out. There were some brilliant red herrings in this, actually. I did want to mention that, but I won't say any more because I don't want to say what they are. Now, next up is a book that I'm mildly conflicted about, not to the point where I'm losing sleep over it or anything, but I enjoyed reading it. I read it on holiday, and so it was kind of a good by the pool book. I enjoyed the reading experience of it. It was twisty, it was turny, and all of those things. However, I think it could have gone much harder at what it was trying to do. The book is Yellowface. Everyone's talked about this, I feel, so far this year. Well, not everyone, but loads and loads of people have been talking about this. It's by Rebecca F. Kuang. And this tells of 2, I'm not even going to describe them as friends. To me, they were total frenemies. You have Athena and you have June, and they have both gone into writing. That's how they got to know each other. And Athena has become like this massive bestseller. Everyone's obsessed with her books. You know, she's just been huge. And there is this slight jealousy that June has, but they stay friends for whatever reason. There's a really interesting complexity to that I wish actually we'd had a bit more of before. And I don't feel like this is a spoiler because so many people have talked about it. There is a freak incident where Athena dies at her house. June is there, and Athena doesn't show anyone her books before she's finished them. And there is a finished manuscript on the desk, and June takes it. She edits it, she tweaks it, then she decides to publish it. But as it is looking at the experience of Asian people in World War, I think it's World War One, she decides to relaunch herself as Juniper. And there's this question mark around that and cultural appropriation. And, it looks very much at diversity within the publishing industry. And I thought that was already interesting. But I did feel that the whole point of this book is to make you look at the morals of, both stealing art and what does constitute stealing art, because if you edit it and change it, does that mean that you're part of the art? I thought that was a really interesting question. But I think the way it's looking at cultural appropriation, cancel culture, revenge, all those things, to me, it was almost done to a safe point, but whilst being twisty, and I don't know, I felt like I wanted more. I felt like I needed more to really kind of about, whereas I was like, oh, right, okay, a lot of the time. And I did think the ending was a bit ridiculous, and I got what Rebecca F. Kuang was trying to do, but it just, I mean, maybe it's because in my head I was rewriting the ending, and so, I mean, that is an interesting reflection on this book, I guess, because that's sort of about what it is. It's rewriting books, and or can we rewrite our past, can we rewrite our personality, is kind of one thing. So it does look at some really big things. I wanted it to go much, much harder than it did, but I don't believe a big publisher, one of the big five, would publish a book that really did. I feel like maybe an indie, and possibly like under a pseudonym, somebody who's been writing for years and years and years and years, could do that. But yeah, I don't know. This felt like it was a bit squeaky clean whilst trying to be really, really dirty and get to the heart of publishing and all the issues. It did raise questions, like I've said, but it just, yeah, I wasn't 100% behind it. And what I was 100% behind was this, because it was a rip-roaring romp. Admittedly, there may be a couple too many characters and there may be a couple too many twists, but I didn't care. I again devoured this on holiday and on the plane back. It's The Housekeepers by Alex Hay, and this, I mean, I don't like to read the blurb or anything, but one particular sort of quote at the beginning of the blurb inside puts it, oh, and also, hello, there's a map of a big, old, fabulous house in which the book is set inside, and it's bright pink. But it says, upstairs, Madam is planning the party of the season. Downstairs, the servants are plotting the heist of the century. It's set in 1905, and we meet this woman who her father has died. She's come into all the money, and she wants to throw this grand party. She's new money, but she wants to be taken in by old society. And downstairs, in the staff, it's a very unhappy, not totally, but predominantly set of staff, particularly the women. They've been treated quite badly. The way that the men downstairs behave is not great, although there's one really, really delicious member of staff downstairs that has a little bit of a frisson with one of the ladies, and I was all for it. Anyway, but we get to know these women and how they have been treated by the man of the house, how they've been treated by society, and how that's led them into all these different positions, but where they want a heist, they want revenge, they feel that they deserve something because of everything they've been through, and you become so embroiled in that, and you become so hopeful that this heist gets, you know, it pays off, and you really, really are with them. I thought that was fantastically done. I loved the way London was written about. I'm not a big fan of, that's not true. I like a historical novel set in London, but there are a lot of them. So for me, having read quite a few, I feel like I need something with a bit of a different edge or a bit of a different grit, and this did have that, especially because it looks at class and the different parts of London as a city in such an interesting way. I loved the fact that, you know, there were these dodgy policemen, there were all these actors. Oh, it was a proper romp. Or as Kate Harrison Harris said the other day about another novel that I'm going to be reading soon that she'd loved, it's just rompful. And this is a very rompful book. And I would like a lot more people to read it, because, yeah, I just thought it was so much fun. And, yeah, I mean, one quote I saw to describe it as if Ocean's, is it Ocean's 11 or Ocean's 8, had a legitimate baby with Fingersmith. I haven't read Fingersmith. I want to read it. Please don't tell me the twist, because I was going to read it at one point, and then someone did tell me the twist just as I was about to start it. I thankfully now forgotten it. Let's all move on. But I get what they mean about that sort of, if Sarah Waters was writing kind of an adventurous novel, like a heisty, well, this is a heisty novel, it could be along these lines, although that comparison isn't very helpful because Alex Hay is his own writer in his own right. Anyway, I really, really enjoyed this, would recommend. Then we have the second novel by an author whose debut I absolutely loved. It was called The Rapture, and it was based on the true but bonkers history of a cult in Bedford. And oh, that's the post, more books arriving, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was completely fantastic, and have been waiting ages for Claire McGlasson to write a new book, and this is her new book. It is The Misadventures of Margaret Finch. This is set in between the wars in Blackpool, and the prompt for August for the Savage Prompts, which are 13 prompts that my mum and I are reading throughout the year, or reading to throughout the year, because we're reading to prompt, that lots of you lovely lot gave us, and hopefully we're going to do it again next year. And if you're joining in, always keen to hear what you've read for each prompt and stuff. And if you haven't joined in yet and you want to, I'll try to remember to link the video down below, and you can join in the final however many months of the year we've got left. Is it the final quarter now that we're in? I'm not sure. September, October, November, December. Yeah, we are. Anyway, what's this about? As I was saying, it's set. The prompt was to read a book in between the wars, and Shrines of Gaiety, I started in August, but I didn't finish. I'm going to talk about that in my September wrap up when that happens. But this could have counted for that prompt, as I keep saying, it's set in between the wars, and we meet Margaret Finch, who is working as basically an observationist, which I didn't know about. And these are people who a government body was just sending out to go and watch how working class people behaved, almost to try and see if there was some science behind class behaviour and how it could possibly be corrected. But also it's a weird time because there's all of the stuff post-war going on, in the fact that there are less men in the country, women's positions have changed, so Margaret's life is changing and she can't kind of work out how that reflects on her. She's sort of trying to work out who she is. As you get to read on, you realise that there's quite a complicated relationship between her and her mother that's really, really affected it, well, to the extent that she's left home to live in Blackpool. And as she sort of observes Blackpool, she comes across the rector of Stiffkey, I hope that's right, yeah, rector of Stiffkey, who is there and has been disgraced, and this is a true historical fact, as the observationists were, or whatever they're called, and he's in Blackpool putting on a show. He's been disgraced because he's been seen to solicit with prostitutes in London, and so he's using this kind of odd celebrity that he's got to make himself even more of a celebrity. And it's how their paths cross and how that intertwines, which in some ways I did feel really, really worked, and in some ways I felt like this was almost two novels sort of together, yet we didn't ever really get into the rector of Stiffkey's mind. We only get him through newspapers, other people's anecdotes, once Margaret decides to go and investigate that more. So she goes from sort of being an observer to an investigator, and I really, really loved that element. But I did feel there was sort of two, I needed them to gel a bit more, even though they both come into each other's spheres. I don't know. But I loved the setting, not being London in a historical novel, and being in Blackpool, which is a city, town that I really love. Some people really hate it. Some people think it's super duper tacky. I just have a real love for it. It's faded glamour at its finest, and every time I've been, I just have a bloody good time, and I'd like to go back at some point. It's only like an hour or so down the road. I should go more often. Anyway, there we go. That's that one. Really enjoyed this. Definitely going to read whatever Claire writes next. But yeah, the only thing I would say is, like, oh, and I will say, like, the atmosphere, the historical time, all of this fascinating stuff around the rector of Stiffkey and the observations that people were doing on working class people, really fascinating, because I did not know any of that, and I love that when that happens in a historical novel. I just wanted it to gel a tiny bit more, but would recommend. Then a DNF for me, because I started The Hole by Hye-Young Pyun, which has been described as being, translated by Sora Kim Russell, which has been described as South Korea's answer to Misery. And it starts in a hospital room. A man wakes up, he knows something's really wrong, he can't speak, he's trying to work out what's happened. We discover it's a car accident and his wife's died. There's a really sinister moment at the end of that first chapter, and I was thrilled, could not wait to read the rest. A few chapters in, utterly bored. Even though there was it alluded to something was going to happen with his mother-in-law and him, and maybe blame, maybe revenge, maybe, I don't know, and sort of an insight into their marriage. I don't know if it's the translation, I don't know what just didn't work for me. And I also think I didn't help this book necessarily, because I was sort of forcing myself to pick books for Women in Translation Month, and I think what I have to remind myself is I love Women in Translation Month, I love Black History Month, I love Pride Month, all these things, but we should be reading all these diverse authors all the time. It shouldn't just be during this particular phase. And what I want to do going forward, I think, is use those initiatives to read some, because, as we'll come to shortly, I've read 2 absolute corkers in Women's in Translation Month, but also not feel like every book has to be that, or use it as a tool to remind myself, oh, there's those books on my shelves, I want to get to them at a different point. But I don't think I read this I don't think this was a case of right book, wrong time. I just don't think this book is for me. If you've read it, let me know in the comments down below if you think that I should save it from the DNFing pile or giving away pile, because yeah, I don't know, it just wasn't for me, and that's fine. I'm sure it'll be for lots of other people. Then the first of 2 absolute corking books in translation by women, the first of which is All Yours by Claudia Pineiro, which is translated by, oh, it doesn't say on the cover anywhere, naughty. It's translated by Miranda France. And I'd heard about this from Jen's channel. I'd heard about this because Jen Campbell raved about it on her channel. And I know she's a big fan. She's not a big fan. I know she's a big fan of Claudia Pineiro and what was the one? Eleanor Knows. And has read a few others, but this one was also a hit with her. But also, lots of you in the video that I mentioned earlier, the Whatever Happened to Reading for Fun video, recommended this as a really good, fun novel for Women in Translation Month, and you were bang on. It's all about a woman called Inez who discovers her husband is having an affair, and one day follows him and sees him meet the woman he's having an affair with and kill her. And instead of reporting him to the police, Inez decides she's going to clean up, or help clean up, in the way she thinks is best, which is interesting. And because she wants to save her marriage and her life. There's also some stuff going on with her daughter, or their daughter, which sort of interweaves between it all, which I thought was really interesting. But it's a really twisted, dark romp of a book. Rompful. And I really, really enjoyed that. And I love the fact that Inez is trying to do something to minimize any potential drama, fallout, whatever, but as it goes on, things just get worse and worse and worse, and the drama gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I thought the way it led to the ending was perfect. So really, really, really enjoyed this. Would really, really recommend it. If you loved My Sister the Serial Killer, I think you'd enjoy this, even though there's not a serial killer in it, there is a murder. But yeah, I think it's along those kind of literary, thrillery, sort of gothic-y, yeah, I don't know, yeah, noir. Anyway, so I love that. Then my absolute book of August was this, and this is Not Miami by Fernanda Melchor, translated by Sophie Hughes. This is really interesting because some people describe this as a non-fiction book, other people describe it, and a collection of sort of reportage / essays. Some people describe it as short stories, all centered around what's going on with me? All centered around Veracruz in Mexico, and it's such a diverse mixture of stories. I think that's one thing that I loved about it. I've never really read anything quite like it. Fernanda Melchor herself describes these as relatos, which I think in Mexico is kind of like, it's this kind of mixture of true stories but fictionalized, because they're almost oral retellings through the page, because a lot of these are people telling her their stories that she's then documenting, and then he said da, 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 da. But that doesn't break it. You still get completely lost in every story. And this one started brilliantly for me, and so unexpectedly, because the first story is about UFOs. Other stories in here include stories about people trying to get away from South America and getting off the boat too early, or a stop has happened before, so they think they're at the place that they should be. They think they're in Florida, and they're not, because this is not Miami. You also get stories around an exorcism that was massively gripping. You also get insights into the issue with drugs in Mexico, with gangs in Mexico. There's an amazing haunted house. There's an old, really creepy building. And just the way that the atmosphere of Mexico is in this book, and how, you know, you're hearing about how it is for people with, well, in terms of class. There's also loads of stuff around the prison system and how flawed that is and how bonkers that is. And then at the same time, it's all about like UFOs and aliens and myths and legends, and how they're still very much at the forefront of culture and society in Mexico. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant. I loved it, loved it, loved it, and will be recommending it to everyone. Then we have a graphic novel. This is A Guest in the House by Emily Carroll. I absolutely loved Through the Trees. I thought that was great. That was kind of sinister, twisted fairy tales. This is a very sinister tale of a woman who is her husband's second wife. There's a mystery around his first wife, and they're living with his daughter who is quite disengaged from her, and the ghost of his first wife sort of comes back, and it gets more and more sinister as you read along, and a lot of it is kind of very grey and black and white, but then you get these amazing bits of like colour, and we look back at her childhood, how she became obsessed with fairy tales. There's some stuff in there around sexuality, and the images are amazing. I did feel it sometimes lost itself in the fantastical to a point where I couldn't quite work out what it was trying to say, but I really, really enjoyed the imagery. I really enjoyed picking it up, and I was thrilled to read another Emily Carroll. So yeah, we have that one. Then, we're almost there. I picked up a book that I was really, really excited about because the blurb that I'd heard was about a woman called Flor who can predict when people are going to die, and she is part of this family who are predominantly living in America, who've come over from the Dominican Republic, and she, out of nowhere, decides she's going to have a living wake. So she's going to have a wake, but with everyone around her. And so we meet her sisters, and they all bar one have different magical gifts. And then we meet her daughter and her nieces, and they too have a little bit of something. That reminded me a little bit of Leonie Ross's This One Sky Day. The book is Family Law by Elizabeth Acevedo, who I know has written a couple, maybe 3 YA novels. Am I wrong? It could be more than that. I don't want to shortchange anyone. No, she's written 4, so I was wrong. And this is her first novel for adults. And I loved this. I got really, really embodied in the family dynamic of these 4 sisters and the next generation below them, and all of their secrets. And what I think Elizabeth Acevedo does really well is there's a lot of voices in here, but everyone feels really, really different. And I love the way there's this sort of magical realism just sort of gently sort of sprinkled over everything and interweaved within what's going on with their lives and how they use it. Like there's a real thing around the taste of citrus, which I thought was brilliantly done. And also just like how these siblings get on. Sometimes they don't get on, and the family dynamic and the relationship with their mother and the relationship with their daughters. It was just a brilliant family saga with a really a real poignancy, as it went on. I just thought it was a really, really enjoyable read, and I now really want to read Elizabeth's YA novels because there is like something quite, and this sounds like a dreadful pun, but something quite magical about the worlds that she kind of creates and the characters that she creates. And yeah, I just loved it. And I love the idea of there being, of us all having a little something magic. It doesn't mean we can literally do magic. It might mean that we're just really creative, like with food or whatever, or with flavour that seems almost magical. Or it could just be that we have a certain thing about ourselves that's a certain awareness that therefore is a little bit, I don't know, I just love that about it too. So yeah, would recommend this. I whizzed through it, as I did the penultimate book I'm going to talk about, the penultimate book that I read this month, which is I Will Greet the Sun Again by Khashayar J. Khabushani. And I read this because it was the pick for A-Marie's book club. I will link her channel down below. A-Marie, if you see this, I would really love wrap-ups and hauls again, please. Thank you very much. I'm putting in that request. And she picked this, and it is a fantastic debut, which is set in America, LA to begin with, where we meet Kay and his 2 brothers and his mother and father. His mother and father have a slightly difficult relationship, which becomes more tempestuous as you go on, leading his father to basically pretty much kidnap his own children and take them to Iran, where they are introduced to members of the family they've not met, but also their culture there, or half of their culture, I guess, and how that affects them both. But it's also Kay's story of coming to terms with his sexuality. It looks at class, it looks at racism, particularly around 9/11, and how people's attitudes, I was going to say changed, which some did, sadly, but also how hidden, what's the word I want to use? Hidden isms, but that isn't right. But basically the prejudices that people had that they maybe weren't so aware of that really came to the fore. And it looks at that in a really fascinating way. The way this writes about brotherhood I thought was wonderful, and it's not something that I've seen massively in fiction. But I also really loved the relationship between mother and sons, because it's clear that she's quite a young mum and she doesn't quite know how to have the relationship, but also she's finding a whole new life in America compared to in Iran. The story around the father becomes very difficult to read, but also there's a story about his father that's hinted at, and I'm not going to say any more than that I would have loved to find out about, because it might have explained his behaviour, I think. But I thought this was so beautifully written, like it's really subtle, and to say it's simplistic almost sounds like a backhanded compliment. I mean that in the best way. The prose is just, it flows so almost effortlessly, that's what I mean. But so simply builds these images in your head and these emotions and these experiences and the atmosphere and everything. I just thought it was really, really, really good. And it's something that they were talking about when Amory interviewed him. You feel like every single character in this book, apart from Kay, because really the book centres around him, but he could have a future story that we don't know yet, but so could all of they. Like, each one of them almost could get their own novel, and I thought that was brilliant too. So we have that one. And then, last but not least, wow, this is way longer than I meant it to be, sorry. If you're here, I'm thrilled, because also here is another favourite book that I read in August, and that is Jen Campbell's Please Do Not Touch This Exhibit, her latest poetry collection, and this made me cry. I thought, and it's making me feel emotional now, the way Jen has, the way she has, how do I put it? The way she's looked at her experiences, both as a child and going through a lot of medical procedures, and with her journey with IVF, which she talks about on her channel and looks at here, is so, I've really struggled with the words. There's a rawness to it that I thought was, I hate to use the term brave because that can sound really patronising, but there is that, but just, it's an incredibly generous collection, because in here there are poems about what it was like as a child to undergo a lot of hospitalisation, medical procedures, even with excerpts of like parts of her files from the NHS. And there's one like where, and it makes me want to cry, because there's just one bit where it's like, Jennifer has a crooked skeleton but is very active and eager to please, a fascinating specimen. And like, honestly, that it's heartbreaking, and for Jen to share that and the vulnerability in here is, I just think, incredible. Like, I found this so moving. And there are poems that will shock you. There are poems about how certain doctors have behaved, or the things that doctors have said, people who are there to care for us and make us better, that is shocking. And yeah, I think it's incredible, absolutely incredible. And I'm kind of lost for words about it, if that makes sense. Some of them in here, like where's the one? When I revisit this room, I want to leave again. Heartbreaking. Alopecia is just a phenomenal poem in the way that it sort of gives the loss of hair its own almost folklore element is how I would describe it. And there is a lot around folklore, fairy tale, particularly around the sea in here. And yeah, I just thought this was utterly brilliant. So it's out later this month and I urge you all to get it. But I'm going to stop talking about it because I genuinely want to cry. So anyway, that was everything that I read in August. How was your reading month in August? Did you enjoy it? I think I'm not going to include snippets from the month because it's a longer video than I thought. But I would love to know if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were. You might have loved them too, or you might have hated some I loved, or you might have loved some I didn't like so much. You might think I should not have DNF'd the whole, and why not if I shouldn't have. Yeah, I'd love to know all of that. And if you want more Savage stuff, then there's links to everything down below, including my Instagram, my threads, my wish list, my Patreon, all that kind of stuff. And as always, lovely to chat to you. I would love to carry on the conversation in the comments below, and I will see you in another video very, very soon. Bye.